Hi, everybody. It's so good to see you here today and
Hey,
yesterday.
Mike, closer to your mouth.
Hold it closer. Okay, there we go. My name is Mike Badziak. I'm here representing my father-in-law, Staff Sergeant Joseph Stephen Doherty, who was a radio operator on a bomber who went down. He made it out of the plane, we know, but what happened after that, we're not sure. I'm also here representing a group called Heroes Remembered, LLC. We work in cooperation with the Korean government's Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs, and they sponsor a revisit trip for us every year. They do it for veterans too, but they started with our MIA families in 2015. This year, we have some families going on October 25th. We spend 5 nights and 6 days in Seoul, Korea, and around the country, going up to the DMZ, and just to be honored. They want to honor our sacrifices, and it's truly a wonderful trip to go on. The details change each year, but this year they will pay for half round-trip ticket, economy ticket for 2 people, to Seoul, Korea, from wherever your home town is. Let's see. After you get there, there's no charge. You spend for 5 days actually being hugged by the Korean government and the Korean people. That's what the trip is about, really. So it's a wonderful experience, and it's a life changer for some people, really. My wife, who went in 2015, she had never known why she had to grow up without a father, and no one ever thanked her. But going to Korea, you really see the difference he made and she made in her life to support the Korean people. So, if you have a pencil, I will give you we have a website which has contact information on it. The website is heroesremembered.net. And on the About page is the contact information. And if you send me an email, we're probably filled up for this year, but if you send me an email, you'll get on the list for next year or future trips. So it's a first-come, first-served thing. My cohort in crime here is Brenda Lott. She has been working with me since the start, almost. So she knows much more about the program, some of the aspects than I do. She works with the participants. We ask someone each year to give a small presentation to the audience at one of the ceremonies. So Brenda helps get. Yeah, well, I'm just a computer guy myself. So anyway, she's the heart. So anyway, if you're interested, this year, like I say, we're limited in the number of people, but if you want to go sometime in the future, send me an email. We'll put you on the list for next year and whenever you can make it. So.
And I'll be around.
Yeah.
I'll be around after this if anyone wants to put your name. I'll be around after this is done today. And so if you want to ask me a question or give me your name or get where you're supposed to contact, so we'll know to send you a letter next year when it starts. Or when we find out.
Yeah, we won't probably find out details for next year's trip until February, March time frame, but we expect it to be also in the fall, October, October-ish trip. So, any questions now I'll take, and
email again, please.
No, the website is heroesremembered.net. And the phone number and email is on the About page on that.
All right. Thank you,
Okay?
Mike.
Thank you.
All right. Now I'm going to have the director answer a question that was asked yesterday, the designation between the war and the conflict.
So none of us are lawyers, nor do any of us play a lawyer on TV. So we had to phone a lawyer, and we did. So it goes back to the fact that the Constitution, Article 1, gives Congress the authority with which to declare war. The last time that authority was exercise was World War II. It hasn't been exercised since, simply because of the expansion of executive powers, the fact that the U.S. was a signatory on the United Nations Charter in 1945. So everything subsequent to World War II is legally deemed an international conflict. The reality is society, media, use the word war. So whether it's the Vietnam War, Korean War, Persian Gulf War, legally, those are all international conflicts because Congress did not declare war. So I hope that answers the question. But as Greg Gardner said, rightfully so, that should not require any of you to give back war medals.
All right. The rules, these are generalized questions, not case specific, so please raise your hand, and one of the people with microphones will come to you, and keep the microphone close to your mouth. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for having me. I am Lynn Lightfoot. I am here for my cousin. I'm sorry, it's killing me. My cousin John Kerwin, he died just days after his 19th birthday. He was apparently part of Hill 303. He died as a prisoner of war outside of Pyongyang. I understand that there was a testimony by another returned POW that stated that that man actually buried my cousin. What I'm trying to find out is someone here told me that there is an MIACAP list. I hate initialisms. I'd like to know, where do I get this list, because I understand that there may be some information about who this person was that said he actually buried my cousin.
All right. Dr. Berry's going to come up and answer that.
Yeah, and I'm going to give a little bit of an unsatisfying, satisfying answer. So the short answer is, thank you so much for speaking with me. Oh, am I too close? Thank you so much for speaking with me earlier about your case. As mentioned, for you specifically, I'm going to add that to the list of things that we respond to when we respond about your specific questions. So the short answer is we should be able to get that information for you. It all has to go through your service casualty officer. So I'm going to answer some of your other questions and add this to it for your case. And if someone else has a question about the POW list, come up to me at the end. We'll write your name down, and then we'll make sure that we get that information to you. We have to do all of that correspondence through your scope, your service casualty officer.
All right, go ahead, back here.
Good afternoon. My question is for Dr. Berry. Given that we now have contact with the Chinese and they are giving us information, do you have any idea, one, if you will be getting reports on air losses or air losses that they recovered, or air their reports of shooting down, I guess, what they call kills? And the second is, do you have any potential timeline for when that information would become available for you to share with us? Thank you.
That's a great question. What I'll start by saying is that closer? Even closer?
Better, yeah.
This feels very odd, but if it's too close, I know that causes a problem. So that's a great question. I want to start by saying the information that we have and some of the information we received this year was about air losses. However, it was only photos, so we were only given images. We weren't given any reports yet. We have questions that we want about certain incidents, and we've asked for additional research on those. And then as we move forward, hopefully, with our archival exchanges, those are the types of things that we're going to ask for from the PLA archives. And the other thing that I would asterisk and say is they've asked for things from us, we've asked for things from them, so we also have to continue the research that we're doing for the questions that they've asked to ensure that we can continue to have this mutual reciprocity. And if there's a specific case that you're interested in, again, please come up to me at the end, or you can also talk to your service casualty officer and just say, please make sure Don adds this to the list of things for China. Thank you.
All right. Next question. Anyone?
Thank you very much for this session and this activity and all the work that you do. I was kind of reaching back into the meeting last year and wondering if there had been any further developments in the recovery efforts for Ensign Jesse Brown, around who the movie Devotion was written and dedicated. Thank you.
You'll recall us telling you, you met Jessica McKnight. Jessica was the granddaughter of Lieutenant or Ensign Jesse Brown, who, as if you've seen the movie Devotion, was the first African-American naval aviator shot down over the Chosin Reservoir and still remains unaccounted for. Fred Smith, the founder and CEO of FedEx, approached the Department of Defense and said he would like to embark upon that. We provided him a alumnus anthropologist from DPAA who he assembled everything ready to go. We had him ready to go out the door. COVID hits. COVID hits and has changed the dynamic in inordinate ways in North Korea. To this day, the non-governmental organizations that operated in North Korea for decades with agricultural support, with healthcare, and any number of things have still not been allowed back. Think about that. They were there operating successfully, helping the North Korean people for decades out of charity. Kicked out, no argument there. When COVID hit, a lot of things changed, but to this day, they're still not allowed back to resume their operations as they had successfully for decades. Fred Smith and essentially the Jesse Brown endeavor was caught up in that COVID and not allowed to be back in. By the way, where's Rick? He left. Rick was actually going with the group. Because again, we wanted to project the fact that this effort, humanitarian in nature, had the science, obviously, had the excavation team, but also had a veteran. So he was the executive director of the VFW, and Rick representing the Korean Cold War coalition families. So we're hopeful that at some point, because we think that will just be a game changer. Because the notoriety that obviously North Korea would receive from the chairman, the founder of FedEx, and more importantly, finding Jesse Brown, would be a goodwill gesture that would open the doors, we hope. But
all right, next question. Go back there.
Thank you. And again, my gratitude to all of you for the work you do for us. So my question is for Dawn. Yesterday you mentioned, I think a colleague of yours, Nicole, was doing research or something, I think research on F-51s. Can you explain kind of what kind of research? Thank you.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we're very good at is, or as good as possible, is researching our unaccounted for air losses, or air losses where we're not quite sure where they went down, so off the scope and on the scope losses. With the F-51s, what we were trying to do is look at all crashes. So even if there were no BNR, bodies not recovered from those crashes, all across the Korean peninsula. So she looked at all F-51s across the peninsula, are the known crash sites, and then also a little bit about some of the crashes that we didn't know that would have had a larger range. That project is still continuing, but it was in direct response to a family who may still be here that was related to an F-51 crash. Primarily what we were looking at for this one was South Korea, because it was operationally related right now, meaning that we can action it right now in South Korea. But over time, we're also going to be building up our North Korean air losses, and that's some of you might know as a little bit of one of my many passions at the agency, particularly the off the scopes, because they're really interesting. Did that answer the question?
That did. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Raise your hands. Back in the right-hand corner.
Hello, thank you. I'm Ellen Heipel Nafziger. My question is for Dr. Don Berry. It's about an air loss. And follow me. This is difficult for me to do. I'm shaking like a leaf. But since you have visited with the PLA archives concerning air losses, my dad went down. Well, I could read you the story, but you could too, I suppose. But I have his flight number, case history. The point being, I have to read. I'm interested in those images. You said you saw images and photos from the PLA that they shared with you. And I'm curious, were any of those images from May 21st, 1953 at all? My dad was in this area in North Korea, above the DMZ. The small town was Onni. I have his coordinates and everything on my documentation from my casualty officer. And he was last seen alive after the crash. They know where the plane crashed. They found his parachute. He was running up a ridge, and his flight leader just stayed in the area and communicated all this information. And they saw him once he was on the ridge. They had sent for the helicopter to come in. And what happened was that he just kept running and he went into a thicket. Sadly, the helicopter, when he was there, he could not sit down on the ridge and he couldn't see into the thicket. And my dad never came back up. At the same time, I have a map here of the location. Whoops, wrong map. This particular map I'd love to share with you. It has all of the friendly camps, and it has all of the Chinese camps above the DMZ. They have his plane loss circled. They have Chinese camps on both sides. He's on a ridge, and he was naturally taking out the Chinese supply lines, bombing. And so when he went down, there was pretty dusty and all, but I'm just so curious. They saw the Chinese going up and around, and they figured they were going up and then down and over the ridge. And I'm curious if any photos were taken by them.
Yeah, let me first say thank you so much for your question. I know it's hard to speak to a big audience.
I'm a picture and point and show person.
And I know that you've met with a few of the analysts and historians on the Korean War team. I do want to clarify for the entire room that we only received a very small amount of information from China, and the information that we received from China were related to specific air losses that were lost in Chinese territory, so not in North Korea. I have had a number of questions from families today and yesterday about could China potentially give us information about air losses in other places? Could China potentially give us information about POW camps? And the answer is these are questions that we might be able to ask, but for right now, what we were asking first was for about specific air losses within the borders of China. Anytime you get outside of the borders of China, there's further complexity that maybe someone from policy might want to touch on. I know enough to be dangerous, but I do want to keep my job. So, and then if there are other questions about your specific loss, what I would say is if you have questions, make sure your service casualty officer knows, and we'll work on getting you those answers. And speaking generally, we're really excited by what's happened so far with China, and hopefully this is just the beginning. But right now it's only a very small number of cases, air losses within Chinese borders, and that information is only being shared with the families that they relate to directly. And those are all correlated losses. So they're losses that we know who was on them and where they crashed, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And I was here in 2002, it was either 2002 or 2003, when China themselves came from their archives and promised us news about air losses. And I've been coming every year almost, but not every year, but for 22 years. And I've been waiting for China to say something. And I'm so pleased, I'm just like, I'll use your word from earlier today, hopeful that Dad might be found, or a picture taken or something, because he was alone that day. There's no friend with him up there. Flight leader had to stay and go back. And, I'm just frustrated. Thank you.
And what I would say is, generally, we can't make any promises for what China will or will not do, and we can't make any promises for what's going to happen globally. But as I mentioned when I spoke, all we can do from our part is try. So thank you for coming. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your persistence, and we're trying.
Thank you for that. All right, we have a question right here.
Thank you for this afternoon. I have two questions, actually. I was curious when we were talking about, especially when they were talking about the bone fragments, there were no women involved in the in the Korean War, correct?
Was the question, were there any women lost during the Korean War? Was that it?
Yeah, were there any women involved in the war, lost or involved, either one? Because I'm just curious, because all of the people we've been talking about that were lost were all men, and I assume there weren't any women because they were all soldiers.
Yeah, you're right. What I would say is that when we were talking about talking to women, what we meant was we don't always interview women, because men were the ones who were in the war. The tradition with Macri, our partners, and they do an excellent job, is they interviewed men in towns. Because in Korea, when you get married, you often move to another town. And so they wouldn't necessarily focus on asking women questions about what happened because they're not from there. And one of the things that's changed in the way that we've been conducting investigations is we've been asking the women, because even if they don't know about what happened in that town, then they might know about what happened where they were from. They might have memories, their mother or father might have told them something. And so that, when we were talking about women, that's the piece that I was speaking about. And then there's a much longer story about women in the Korean War on the Korean side and all of the different people who supported it, but specifically, that was what I was referring to.
Right.
Oh, I see.
No, I think. But if to answer your question, for our unresolved service members, we have no women on that list. If that's to answer
Can you
your
repeat
question.
that?
Yeah. On our unresolved service member list for the Korean War, there are no women on that list.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you
very
for
much
that.
for your question.
There's women on our wall as members. They died, but they weren't killed.
They're not
Not accounted for.
Yeah, there's no
Yes, sir.
women unaccounted for. Right.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I had a second question, actually.
Oh,
Go ahead.
sorry, hold on.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. So something else, just my personal story. My uncle was signed on for the Air Force, but then he got moved over to the Army. And I'm just curious in general how that happens, because it was unexpected for him.
I did too.
Can you repeat, please?
Yeah, okay. So my uncle, before he died in the war, he was signed on to be in the Air Force. And then somehow the Army took him on, basically. Like, he had to completely switch branches of the military. And I just want a clarification on how that process works in the military, like when you go from like Air Force into Army.
So I think just for this specific question and for case-specific information, we'll take your information and I'll look into that case specifically so we can get you an answer, if that's okay.
Okay. Can I actually have your contact as well after this?
So I'm not allowed to contact families directly. All the family contact and communication goes through the service casualty offices, and then they connect back with us.
Oh, I see. Okay. Okay.
And we do that so that they will have a record of any questions and correspondence, that there's not anything malevolent. It's just the service casualty office is the first line, and they need to have an accurate record of all the communications between us.
Okay. I understand.
But to your point, there were people that were often going to go into one branch of service and then somehow found their way into another branch. That was not unusual. So that's, but it really doesn't have anything to do with the circumstances of loss and how we would account for them. Okay. Next question.
Howdy. My name's Tom Crockett. I try to listen to presentations and write down questions that I think might be of general interest, sort of the obvious questions. Sometimes maybe they're too obvious, but like you mentioned phases several times in the different operations, and I think like the Punch Bowl, the ROK, Republic of Korea, and then the North Korea, different phases for each of those. That's the first thing I want to clarify. They are different, and the phases for like the Punch Bowl operation would be identifying remains, whereas the others would be recovering remains, right? And my question was kind of how complete are these phases? Like the Punch Bowl phases, the intention there is probably to disinter every unknown remain and try to identify it, right?
Yeah, I'll answer the beginning part and then I'll turn it over to Kristen. Oh, sorry, Mike, did you want to go first?
Go ahead.
So I author, the phases apply to both North and South Korea, both for the Punch Bowl. And so it's the large-scale, long-term disinterment plan. And yes, the goal is for all of the remains that are in the Punch Bowl, we did have permission to disinter all of them in 2018. Each phase is approved separately. And for North Korea and South Korea, they each have a phase, so a phase 1 through 7. They're just a little bit different because of the way we got remains back. So for South Korea, speaking generally, all of those remains are remains we, United Nations forces, generally recovered ourselves or local people, and we had control of those remains through most of the time that they were with us. For North Korea, almost all of the remains in the Punch Bowl came back through something called Operation Glory in 1954, and so that was how we got the remains into the Punch Bowl. And so when we wrote the phased plan, we have a different plan for South Korea and North Korea. They're both 7 phases. It was all approved together. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So there would be sort of American remains there too, right? In those all of the unknowns. So they just kind of are in the same phases.
All of the remains that are currently in the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific or were part of the larger disinterment plan from the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific were believed to be American remains. So if not believed to be American remains historically, they often stayed in Korea. So all of the remains in the Punch Bowl are believed to be American remains. However, this was before we had advances in science.
Right.
And I will tell you that it's more complicated than that. And I'm going to sidestep down to Kristen, who will be able to give specific answers scientifically on that one.
Thank you, Dr. Berry. I will say that we have repatriated 10 of those Punch Bowl cases back to Macri, and we were able to determine that those were not U.S. service members through isotope testing and or DNA testing. So when we get those results back, the first thing that we want to do is to ensure that it's not an Asian American U.S. service member. So we go through and we make sure that that is not the case. And then once we have enough information to say that this is believed to be someone that that we should repatriate Macri, we will have those scientists come to the lab for a joint forensic review, and we will go over all of that evidence together and make that decision that, okay, we need to repatriate these back to South Korea.
Okay.
Thank you.
The question I'm trying to get at is, at the end of these phases, will that be all of the unknowns from the punch bowl?
Yes, sir, it will be.
Okay. And then the next question was about the phases for ROK and North Korea that I saw, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Would those also be, again, recovering remains is different, so you're not going to get 100%. But is that all of the known areas where we would like to look, or is that just the first batch of areas?
Excellent question. So the phases just refer to the punch bowl disinterments. So the recovery missions are, historians will go through and do background and figure out where they can support doing recoveries, and then we will send teams into field to do those, or Macri will be assessing those locations, and they will do joint forensic reviews with them.
Okay. You mentioned the remains going to North Korea from the punch bowl. Is there any communication with them about that?
I might have misspoke. The remains were repatriated to Macri in South Korea.
Oh, okay.
Yes, sir.
But they do recover some from North Korean remains, right?
They do.
We do, yes, sir.
No, we don't. They do.
South Korea, yes.
No, from North Korea.
The South Koreans will recover remains from the North Koreans. Yes,
so
sir.
they go to South Korea, and then if they're, what I'm thinking about is if the presence of remains that would be of interest to North Korea might be a leverage or a tool to get them interested in talking to us.
So that is where this breaks down completely and just shows the complete diametrically opposition of both sides. South Korea, over the years, has recovered a number of North Korean remains.
Right.
They always, often, offer to repatriate. It is met with absolute disdain, absolute rejection, and no recovered by South Korea remains of North Korean soldiers have ever been repatriated.
My question was if they give us the same response. Would North Korea say the same thing to us and be not interested in?
Well, as you heard them say yesterday, so in the early 90s, North Korea turned over 208 boxes over 5 years. We had 10 years of joint recovery operations from 1996 to 2005. We had a unilateral turnover in 2007, and then we had the last unilateral turnover in 2018. So North Korea episodically has returned remains, but it's always done on who knows what.
So we have never had remains to return to them?
No.
Okay. Okay.
We've only repatriated South Korean remains.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Raise your hand. Any questions? There's a lady right over here.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Lair. I'm here for my Uncle Dugan Harris.
Can you put the microphone closer?
Sure.
Thank you.
Is that better?
Better.
Okay. I'm here for my Uncle Dugan Harris. And he was KIA January 30th, 1952. He was put on a stretcher, but they came under heavy artillery fire, and they had to abandon him. Now, I'd like to ask the panel, could you please expound on the issue that if a loved one has a general idea of where that loved one went down, that there's issues of climate, like say on a ridge. If they fell on a ridge, they wouldn't necessarily still be there. So could you please expound on the issues of climate, perhaps wildlife, things like that? And I'd also like to encourage all of you that are so inclined to speak about your loved ones to anybody that you can. Go to your VFWs, your American Legions, ask to be a guest speaker, and keep your loved one alive and pass that on to the next generations. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question, and I will repeat it just in case everyone couldn't hear. So she is asking about particular recovery circumstances and the climate where these lost locations occur, and how the climate and environmental factors, land transformation, makes the recovery process, could potentially make the recovery process more difficult, and how remains might not necessarily be in that exact location, particularly if they happened on a slope, or if animals are in the area, how that's going to affect it. And all of those things absolutely will. We also deal with different types of soil acidity, so acidic soil will break down remains faster. So all of these factors will definitely influence the condition of the remains. And when the archaeologists go into the field, they'll do an initial survey of that particular lost location. And during this survey, what they're looking at are those land transformation processes, and to see, okay, where did the particular crash or the battle happen, and how have things moved and changed since then, and where might we be able to find the remains. And that's part of the archaeologist's job, is to assess all of that, to come up with the excavation strategy, determine, okay, how far are we going to dig, and how deep are we going to dig? Does that answer your question? Thank you very much.
So from the terrestrial recoveries that they do, environment does play a role. You heard about acidic soil and your rain, different things like that. But for the most part, for DNA, as you heard about the fit for use, anything that's recovered from South Korea or terrestrially that's not been chemically treated, we do very, very well with a number of the different analyses we have. And considering our last hope, which is that chemically treated method that we do, that works with stuff that is, let's say, half an inch long, okay? Anything that starts to get below that half inch is something that we're looking into and is kind of that next 10-year phase. We're going to have to figure out how to repair the DNA, because that's actually getting beyond what you can do in a biochemical nature. But so far, the stuff that we got for the K55 or recovered out of South Korea works like gangbusters in our lab. It works very well. But again, it's about, if we start to see that as a lab, both our labs, we look to develop how are we going to increase that success? What do we need to do? So we rely on the anthropologists tell us, well, this soil's been acidic. It's sitting in here. This is what we're seeing. And then we'll look at it from a biochemical standpoint as well.
Next question.
I'm going to add just a little bit to that, too.
Sorry.
I'd also say that even before we go out to do any kind of recovery or excavation, we have our historians that'll also do a lot of research. They'll do investigations. So we also have folks that'll go out. They'll talk to anybody, see if there's any witnesses, see if did they see someone, come down through that area. There's a lot of times that the locals will also find remains, may bury them. So that might be information that they would find. And then that would also help with our excavation strategies when we go out to do recoveries of remains. Anything else?
Go ahead.
My name is Peter McTaggart. I lost two uncles in Korea, Air Force pilots. My first uncle was still MIA. He was flying a F-82G twin Mustang, armed reconnaissance to Seoul in March of '51, when the North Koreans were retreating from Seoul. His brother was lost a year later, flying a photo recon. He was looking, we have recovered him, and he's home. My question is, I was in Korea this last November, And around Seoul, his last radio contact was between Daegu and Seoul. And then he wasn't heard from since then. He had contacted another aircraft. But that area is so incredibly built up. Has that been thoroughly investigated, or the chances of finding anything there right now? It looked to me, as I went around on the tours and everything, it was just so remote that anything could ever be found. Is there any information on if it was recovered, would they be in the punch bowl, possibly?
You answer.
With urbanization just across the world, there are times where new buildings are being built, new homes are being built, that people will come across remains. When that happens in South Korea, they do turn them over. It would either go to the police or to MACRI to investigate further. So there are remains that do get encountered with different buildings that are going on.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Anybody else?
First of all, I'd like to say thank you, too, on behalf of my father. This is a forensic science question in regards to a lot of us are getting older. So if the children are getting older of the servicemen, then their brothers and sisters and siblings and some of the things you have to go through to get your Y strain, that is very difficult to do. My question to you is, have you considered asking the family when you reach out and you're still trying to identify if these brothers, these siblings, went to a local hospital? And I say that because most local hospitals say lab work, tissue, all of that for close to 100 years. So you do have the opportunity to try to latch on to a local community collaboration that might get you the answer of the brother that died, or a nephew that died, a male that you might need.
Ma'am, that's an excellent question. Typically, those are last resort samples, and we actually do work with the individual's families on that. So as you're talking about that, if you go in for a biopsy, the hospital will do a paraffin block, so they'll embed that tissue in a paraffin block, and they have to reserve that block for 50 years. It's considered a medical record. We do stuff on our current day operations and working with those paraffin blocks. The problem sometimes with the paraffin block is that you will get potentially two profiles out of there because of how they prepare them. The good news is, like you talk about the why, we do sit down with families here. That is the best part of my teams and my day when we come to these family member updates, is when you all come and talk to us, say what references we have, and we can pull out our chart, and we're like, okay, did he have any living brothers? No. Okay, did he have a living uncle? Yep, but he's passed away. But he had a son. And so we do that. But yes, we do look at alternative references. One of the best ones that work for us is if there is no living paternal and the brother has passed and somebody has kept the old style watch that has the expandable metal wristband, that captures a lot of cells in it. And so we can actually go into that sometimes. We'll get an answer about, what about letters? Unfortunately, letters only work about 1% of the time. But sometimes the hearing aid that they just put in a bag and stuff away, we may be able to get something out. So as a last resort, we absolutely do that. We look for that. But then you heard about today about that, and again, the big word, SNP, we'll just call it the difference test. That's going to take a maternal reference that we have and turn it into a nuclear. So we're trying to cover all of our bases, but we do look for that. Okay. That's a great question.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Go ahead.
This is an administrative question. Yesterday it was mentioned that there were 2 additional sites of underwater aircraft potential wreckages and that a decision would be made forthcoming whether to take the one from the west or the east of the peninsula. And I wondered, is that decision made by MACRE, by DPAA, or by a combination of the two? And how soon might we be able to know? Would it be within 1 year, 2 years, 3 years that they would look at the additional sites?
Was that from your brief, Don? Go ahead. Just use the mic.
Hi, John Figueres again. I think what you were referring to, though, that what came up was a site off of Busan that both MACRE and DPAA were working together, and that's a continuous. What we are investigating too is the potential for other underwater sites. As we mentioned, that if we can get to underwater sites and we do recover things, that there potentially is good DNA that we can recover. But we'd have to, I don't like to say what specific sites, because as we plan our operations, again, a lot of factors go into that. There are a few. So I guess I'm not sure if I'm getting right at your question, but the question I guess I'm answering is there are other potential sites, and we're going to look at these things. Is that answering your question?
And then is the decision made in conjunction with MACRE? Do you have to have permission from the Korean government? Is it something that we decide ourselves? Thank you.
It depends. Again, it depends on the proximity to land, where it is within the international waters, where it is within the the waters that are associated with the border. And as we plan these missions, depending on the depth, the assets that we can get, obviously we enjoy doing it with MACRE or with partners. I came off of a dive site off of Vietnam that was done with an Army team, and it depends on what assets are available. We've done work with Navy dive teams, Coast Guard dive teams, partnership teams. It just depends on the circumstances, the time of year, and what other dive assets we have going out on missions. So in other words, we do make all those decisions there in our headquarters as we plan the mission, and depending on the research that's done. There are options available to us. Does that help?
Thank you. Yeah. All right. In the back there.
This is kind of a age question follow-up as well as a cultural question. We're all getting older, but so are the North Korean witnesses to various events. Do you know or have any clue as to whether the North Koreans tell stories to their younger generations, and whether those witnesses are viable in your research efforts?
Yeah, so I see as I look down the row, Chris might be the best position to answer this, or Dr. Bay might be the best position to answer this. From our perspective at DPAA, we on the research team don't have direct contact with the North Koreans, and it's very hard for us to have visibility on what they're doing in country, and I don't know if you wanted to add anything else.
The only thing that I would say is I've only had academic communication with them, so I have absolutely no idea what they're telling their offspring and their descendants. But I would say that since they have openly rejected the repat, there's, I think, according to the data that MACRE presented yesterday, I think it was 990 individuals of North Koreans that they have sitting in their warehouses in South Korea, and North Korea has continuously rejected that. So it seems like, and in talking with other people in the lab, the DPAA lab, it seems like they're at this point they're just not interested in that. So they're probably not talking too much to their offspring and the other villages and stuff like that. Does that answer your question?
Robin's there. Oh, sorry, you go first and then Robin next, okay? Just hold on. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Chuck Shaw, and I requested and received the Operation Glory Chinese transfer roster with suggested identities for the remains. It's an alphabetical roster of remains evacuated under Operation Glory. It's remains returned by the Chinese and North Koreans from the battlefields and POW camps. They list just under 2,000 names, and I'm wondering how many remains were interred at the Punch Bowl after those, and I'm wondering what the discrepancy is between the names and numbers they listed and the numbers that were actually interred. Thank you.
You've just asked my favorite question, but I don't know if I'll be able to give you a complete answer right now. So Operation Glory was my life's passion for approximately 5 years. Dr. Abe Schrag, who's in the back, has continued that work. In terms of the Operation Glory roster, it really depends on each section. So you're asking about the names and the discrepancies. In total, there should be 4,219 sets of remains. A little over 400 from North Korea were interred in the Punch Bowl after they had analysis at the CIU lab in Kokura, Japan. In terms of discrepancies, it really depends which part of the roster. Part of the reason we designed the North Korean phases, which are all part of the one big plan, the way that we did was that we started with United Nations military cemeteries that we had records for, so we had those. Then we moved to POW camps. So for the UNMC cemeteries, United Nations military cemeteries, those had interesting patterns. So Debbie was really instrumental in some of the first disinterments from North Korea. Some of those were from the Hunam Cemetery, which is at the beginning of the roster. Those, if you look through it, the names are almost always correct, the service numbers are always correct, the remains we disinterred from the lab were almost the exact same all the way across. If you get to places like UNMC Pyongyang, what our research has shown us over the last decade and a half is that for the remains that came from UNMC Pyongyang, those locations are generally correct. But there are also discrepancies in terms of ones that came back as isolated burials. For the POW camps, and there might be a lot of POW camp families in the audience still, for Camp 5 and Camp 1 and 3, not the temporary camps, what you see there is a discrepancy in terms of the names. If you look at the list, the Chinese transfer roster, the name returns are alphabetical. And so if you think about it, that's a little bit of a strange way to give remains back. And what we notice is if the name is there, that can sometimes be slightly more positive, but the names were not always in concurrence. So I spent a lot of years with what some people call the tinfoil hat on my head, working on spreadsheets, saying name, location, concurrence, location concurrence, name concurrence, nationality concurrence. And Dr. Schrag has really progressed the ball forward with a lot of that research as well. So the short answer is Chinese transfer roster, really important. There are very significant patterns in it. I would not take any of it as gospel. The lab, when they come in, they do everything through an independent scientific peer review, which I'll hand over to them to answer any questions about that. And that's just one piece of hundreds and in some cases thousands of pieces of evidence that goes into the background research that we put into our disinterments on the research side. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, so it sounds like the battlefields where we buried our remains, it sounds like those records are pretty accurate. But the Chinese records from like the prison camps, those are alphabetical and maybe not so accurate.
So not necessarily battlefield cemeteries, but the United Nations military cemeteries where there was plot, row, grave, those are pretty accurate. I would say an exception would be Coterie and Udamni. Those are very, very complicated, and what we know from the data, from going through it, is it's very complicated. And I don't know, Kristen, since you've worked on some of these, if you want to touch on anything, but historically, just one piece of the puzzle, and there's a lot of puzzle pieces, and a whole team of people who've been putting together that puzzle for a few decades. Did you want to add anything else?
Thank you, Dawn. Yeah, so we'll say when the punch bowl remains come in, the historians will provide us with a list of potential historical candidates based on the combing through the historical background that they have done, and then we work off of that list that they have given us and that background research to start doing comparisons with the remains. And then when the DNA comes in, we incorporate that as well. So we're constantly working the punch bowl cases, or any case that we get, with that historical list derived from our historians with all of the other different lines of evidence from the scientific analysis. Thank you.
All right. Back there, Homer.
Hi, my name is Bill Bonnell, and I'm here to represent my uncle, Arthur Berry, Corporal Arthur Berry from Shortsville, New York. He was captured in a battle on 23 April 1951, and he was marched north, and he died at a small camp, Yangdang, outside Pyongyang, on September 16th, 1951. I don't have a question. I have a thank you and a story. I want to thank the director and Jennifer and DPAA. Last year when I was here on Thursday, they approached me and said, do I have a passport? I said, of course I do. They said, we have a trip to South Korea. Are you interested? So my wife and I had to discuss that, and we said yes. So on Friday morning, we said yes. On Saturday, turns out that it was the end of September, 6 weeks away. On Saturday morning, the embassy reached out to me, and on Monday, I started communications with the South Korean government. And what it was is every year in the for the Armed Forces Day, the end of September, the South Korean government invites 50 members of the senior UN leadership from the Korean War or their families to Korea. So we went. There was 43 individuals, and it was with General Clark's grandchildren. It was with the Ethiopian general's daughter. So, I mean, it was very senior leaderships, and myself, who was, my uncle was a POW. So it was sort of I was out of place until I met another gentleman who was from South Africa, and his father was a fighter pilot. So there was 43 of us from around the world, 2 veterans from Turkey and from Colombia, 7 different languages, so there was a lot of translations. We were in South Korea in Seoul for 3 days, and we visited the DMZ, and we had lunch with the president. Yeah, okay, there was 500 of us, but we had lunch with the president. And things like that. But the story I want to tell you is that the gentleman, John, from South Africa, whose father was a fighter pilot who was shot down over North Korea, okay, that was 2 months before John was born. So he was there looking for connections and whatever he could find out about his father. Well, there was a grandson of the Netherlands commanding general who was there, who reached back to the Netherlands. So the story is that the Netherlands was ground forces on the ground, and the South Africa provided fighter cover for them. The gentleman from Netherlands, his grandfather was on the ground when the South African pilot was flying over, protecting him, and was shot down. So there was that connection that, the Netherlands thanked the South African pilot's, son for thank you, so that the son was very emotional. Of course, I am now. But he was very emotional and, thankful that there was able to do that connection. So yes, so we're here for the U.S. and things like that, but there's other countries, South Africa, Netherlands, and things that are in the same situation. And I was lucky enough to meet some other people from other countries, So I want to thank the director and Jennifer and DPAA for offering me that opportunity to reach out and pass information about the U.S. and meet other people. So I just want to say thank you.
All right. Next.
My name's Jack Witt. Here for my uncle Jack Witt. So I had a couple of comments and a question. Dr. Berry, your passion has inspired me to write a book about my uncle and his situation in my family's military history. And in the research for what I've been doing, well, let me say, I just started my 31st year as a high school teacher, math, science, and computer science. Having transitioned completely over to computer science, I can pretty much include in my curriculum whatever I want to. So, I'm looking at some DNA inclusion, anatomy where we can get into some bones, soil science with my ag teachers. I'm an honorary member of the history department because I like it. I was just wondering, I know there was a book a few years ago that we got curriculum-wise, had some lesson plans in it. I'm working on some more of my own, and I'm just wondering, is there a project going on where that might be continued, or do I need to write my own book?
Thank you so much for your question. This might actually delve into partnership territory because we had a partnership with the Korean War Legacy Foundation. They're the ones that created the book. Dr. Matuszewski, who is partially the new me in partnerships and innovation from a few years ago, works in partnerships on research, so he might be able to speak to that if they're thinking of updating the book or anything like that. And I also just want to say thank you because it's really, really wonderful. The stories that you have, some of them are, many of them are harrowing. You're all so patient. You've been dealing with so much for so long. And there have been a few people who've said, like you just did, that they're putting that down on paper, I think is not only important for you, your family, you personally, but it's also so important for us. So when you write it, if you want to send any drafts my way, I'm excited to read it. On my personal time, of course. via the scope.
Thanks, Dawn. So as of right now, there's no plans to expand that, but we'd be definitely interested in hearing some thoughts that you might have. So I would reach out to your SCO to get that information to us.
Right now, Robin, go ahead.
Good afternoon. First of all, I just want to give a great thank you to Mr. McKeague for allowing me to have this wreath for you and for taking the time to answer me. There are still a few hearts out there, and I'm going to be leaving shortly after this closes up. So if you haven't already taken the time to write a quick message of love, please do so immediately afterwards, because I don't want to just, not have you there. The other thing I wanted to say is, and it's kind of interesting, I think somebody might have touched on this, but I've gone into the schools myself and talked about my uncle. And not all schools are willing to, do this. But, you got to just put your foot forward and try a little harder sometimes to get through to the educational departments. But I also take Korean War veterans with me, and they tell their story. So it's kind of nice, if you have a Korean War veteran and then you have your story, there's this very interesting connection. So I would encourage you to do that. But the POW MIA Day is coming up. And that is an awesome opportunity to attend one of those events or let someone know that you're willing to speak and tell your story. So I would encourage you, if you haven't already thought of it, to think about doing something like that. Or get on the radio and tell your story. Find different ways, different avenues to do this, because it's important. And it does keep those memories alive. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jeff.
I want to give you my thanks to all of you that you've done so far. I've got a question I'm going to in a while, so I'll get to that in a minute. I have my cousin. His name is Wayne Barton Gill. I know he was in Okinawa and had a month to go in the Army. and he got sent right away into South Korea. I know that with the Korean War and the Cold War, we have this going now. I mean, Wayne and I we're the same generation. We're 25 years apart, but we're the same generation. So he was in the Korean War, and I was in the Cold War #1. There's a second Cold War now, right? You got that, I hope. So what's going on now, I'm going to mention just this one thing, and that's just this, and that is that I've been a lawyer in Oregon State, and I was in the Army for like 6 years total. And I probably, when I worked for the Oregon State Bar, I worked on military and veterans and military for really 6 years of work that I did as a volunteer work at that time. Now, I'm a retired attorney now, so I'm not working with the Oregon State Bar anymore because I'm retired. But I would like to do volunteer work now. And I've looked at your website, DPAA website. It talks in the bottom there, it says volunteer. I would like to do volunteer work with you or whoever, whatever I could do. And I want to say that now. If there's anybody here who wants to talk to me, I would like to do volunteer work with you now. That's the end of it. If you want to talk to me at some point soon, I would like to talk to you about that, doing volunteer work here. Thank you.
I mean, I can address that. I would just say that you reach out to your SCO, and maybe we could work something out.
So there's a couple of different ways to volunteer, and what I would say is we're very lucky to have a very extensive partnership program, including the Hub and Spoke program, which Zach Matuszewski spoke to. I would also say there are internal DPAA volunteers. The lab has a very, very robust program for both volunteers and interns, and I don't know if you wanted to add anything else in terms of the direction we're going at all. Or I can add, I can keep talking. What I would say is on the research side, it's a little bit more complicated. So because of a bunch of different factors, it makes it a little bit harder to have volunteers because you have to have a government computer on the government side. So I worked on, I did the Pacific Leadership Academy, and I spent about a year helping to develop a more robust volunteer and internship program that was largely based on the laboratory's model. That is in its very, very, very early stages. So on the research piece within the agency, hopefully there will be more opportunities. We also do have some opportunities on the research side that are currently taking place in the Nebraska laboratory with our disinterment historians. So there are a lot of different ways that you can become involved. I would say one of the easiest and exciting ways to be involved is through our Hub and Spoke partnership institutions, because they have different regulations around government and information sharing. And I probably missed a bunch of stuff.
I guess I have to also partially answer that, but from the operations side, we have, I'm hesitant to take in volunteers before to go out in the field, but obviously there's always concern there, safety concern, health and conditioning concerns, et cetera, and things like that. I know that's not what you said. You don't want to go out in the hot, dusty fields of Southeast Asia. But the interesting thing is that, this desire to help, I'd like to maybe find a way to get there, and the director knows this too. I feel like a docent sometimes, or where I am constantly giving tours, and to the point where I might be losing my voice at times. But no, thank you for that. And it will spur some thought in my mind of maybe how volunteers can help more. Requires more thinking on my end. Sorry, I can't think on my feet right now.
Hey, I got a quick one here. I just had an acronym I didn't know. the continued focus on underwater DMZ and CCZ cases. What's CCZ?
Stands for Civilian Control Zone.
Okay.
Okay. And you got the others, right? DMZ and was it?
Okay.
Let's keep going.
All I wanted to say was I reiterate what everybody else has said here, that we really appreciate what all of you have done and continue to do to bring us closure. And we really, really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Actually, it was going through my head. Glossary up front, definitions up front. Thanks.
All right, over here.
I'm Mary Liverman. Thank you again for this last 2 days. My question is, if you identify some remains and there's no family or anyone to come forward for those remains, what happens to that soldier? And what will happen to the Koreans that is rejected? What will happen to their remains? Where will it go?
If there's no living family member for an American service member, the service secretary concerned becomes the family member and will direct disposition, usually at Arlington. And I will tell you, in the case of a World War II case, there was one, they were buried out in Golden Gate National Cemetery. The Army was so good, they put out the word, and there were hundreds of people there from the VFW, local Legion, veterans. It was pretty much heartwarming. So there's always going to be someone there. Okay. We attend the funerals, the Arlington ladies attend the funerals, so there is always going to be someone there who cares. And we also put out the words to veterans groups. We often have inquiries about that. So there's never going to be a lonely burial, period.
They need dignity, yes.
Yes.
Okay,
so the
thank you.
second part of your question, so the remains that South Korea finds of believed to be North Korean soldiers that they've offered and been rejected on, South Korea actually inters them in a cemetery in Seoul, awaiting the day, someday, where North Korea might want to have those remains repatriated. Likewise, Chinese remains that the South Koreans had recovered for many years were also rejected. It wasn't until about 9 years ago that China, the PRC, People's Republic of China, asked for them. And so each year in the fall, the PRC sends a delegation to Seoul to recover and repatriate remains that South Korea had recovered from the previous year. And that's a dynamic that changed 9 years ago. So again, maybe at some point North Korea says we would like to have our countrymen back. We don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Raise your hands. Lady over there by the door. Well, two.
I have two questions. The first one is, are you guys utilizing ground penetrating radar or drones? And the second one is, after you go through the site and you excavate and you find remains or not, what do you do with the site afterwards, and is it fit for use, basically?
The tall lady will answer.
So I'll say fit for use as well out on our site. So if ground penetrating radar is something that we determine is something that would be useful and necessary, we would use that. With ground penetrating radar, what it's going to return is if there's an anomaly in the soil. So it's not going to say there's remains that are buried here, or this is a burial, or this is a crash site. It's going to show an anomaly that would then have to be further investigated. But if it's something that site particularly warrants, we will use whatever tools necessary to complete that excavation or that investigation of that site. What was your, drones. Drones are a little tricky because, again, it's going to be determined by that host nation that we're going into what they will allow us to bring in, and drones can be a little tricky. So we are getting permissions for some countries to bring that equipment in, but it has to be approved by that host nation. And then there was a second part?
After the excavation and clearing the ground, whatever it is, what happens afterwards?
So site restoration. So after we excavate a site, we will restore it. So, and again, that's something that we work with the host nation with prior to that excavation, that typically we will return it to how it was found originally and restore that site.
Restoration.
Site restoration.
So for the excavations, typically the way we would close a site is the SRE. At least last time in Laos, for example, we'd bring a helicopter in. They get a big aerial photo of all the units we dug, and it helps that whatever the lab needs to document, they use that. It's kind of like the closeout. If it is the last site, usually, depending on the size of the site, we'll restore it, as she mentioned it, with like a backhoe. And the host nation officials with us have pretty strict guidance on what they want. For example, in Laos, they didn't really care. The dirt was either left, and that was done a decade before we showed up, but in other missions, they want it completely restored. So for example, I just got back from Indonesia. We were working in a soccer field, digging trench lines, and then we had to put it all back in after, so.
Great, go ahead, next.
Yeah, this question I have, I'm not sure if you can really, I'm sitting here thinking about it, and I felt like, well, if I leave and don't ask, I'll never know. My uncle, who, again, we lost in Korea, and he fought in Germany. When he came back to the States from Germany, and I'm sure as well as other soldiers, he brought back some of the Germans' gear, I would say. But he brought back a sword from Germany, from a officer, whoever, and the Nazi armband. I'm thinking about this is like a DNA question. After all these years, that's been passed around, and I'm sure he handled it. Whether there's still anything on there that's could be useful as far as DNA with fingerprints or something like that, or on cloth or on metal. I'm just wondering.
So that's an excellent question. We have done service hats as a last resort. So in your case, we have living relatives that we've collected. There are times where we don't have what we call a viable reference, and so we start talking with the families about alternative references. One of the best ones we get is we'll ask, is there a baby book? So when the child is born, the mom takes a baby book, takes the first hair cutting and puts it in. We can get mitochondrial DNA from that hair. We've done that a number of times for the missing service member. Sometimes if there are baby teeth, we will ask, can we test it? The tooth at that point will get completely destroyed. We have to crush it all up to get to the DNA. We've been authorized to do that, and we've gotten results. In other instances, their dress service hat has been kept in a bag. Nobody's touched it. We actually will go in and start looking at it with a microscope and sometimes find hair, or we'll swab the headband to get cells that may be on that. So there are times that we can do that. Typically, the stuff that you talked about that's been passed around, we typically will pick up the most modern person who's touched it, because that DNA is very intact. So we typically try not to do that. But we will work with the families on a one-on-one to identify appropriate alternate references. So really, we have really good luck with the first hair cuttings, and we only need 3 or 4 pieces of that hair to do it. So great question.
I'm sorry. I might not have heard, but this is in reference for a follow-up on the phases. So could you tell me how many unidentified people you still have that were disinterred in phases 1 through, say, 4? We can stop it at 4. That are still out there for those phases that haven't even been identified yet. Does anybody know?
Thank you so much for your question. So of the cases that we have in the lab from the punch bowl, There are around 400 that are still unidentified at this time. Yeah.
Okay, so those extra 400 then need these additional supports that you're talking about to try to identify who they are.
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So when we crack the nut to get to the chemically treated samples, one of the things that I've touched on with individuals is one of our products that we give to the DPA is called a mass comparison chart. And so we have a very large file that has every sequence that we've developed from the K208, from the 55 boxes of remains, and the chemically treated. And in there, that lists every sample, and then we will blind search the database and list who potentially is associated with those. And we do have some common sequences, which leads to some of the ones that are unidentified. But that also spurred in 2016, when we brought that online, we knew we couldn't do any additional testing to help them. So that's what started driving us down that SNP or difference test. And that is very similar to what you're hearing in the news on a cold case, but it needed to be developed to work with DNA that was as damaged as 40,000-year-old Neanderthal. So hopefully as we bring this new method on and we optimize it like we did, that's going to help to resolve some of these common cases that we have. So, but remember, what we've done is we've taken that DNA and we've established the borders for a number of these samples. And that allows us to say, oh, well, good, we've excluded all of these people. Sure, it may be these people. But then it also allows the anthropologist to look at it based on height and stature and a lot of different things. So there's a lot that goes into it. So I guess, yes, there's 400, but we're getting better. We're always getting better. So good question. Thank you, ma'am.
Go ahead there.
Yes, over yesterday's discussion and today, there's been the numbers thrown out, 5,000 remaining for the U.S., 7,000, and then 8,000 coming from the DPA and the MPVA. What accounts for that discrepancy in those numbers?
So I'll start. So I use the number 8,100 when I talk. That's the number of total missing at the end of the war. That's what my baseline is for directing how many references I need. Okay. I think the number was 76, 75 something, 75. That is the number remaining from that 8,100 based on what we've already identified. The 5,300 is the estimate of what is remaining in North Korea of the missing. Anyone else? Did I catch that good? All right.
That's it. All right. Good. Over there.
Good afternoon. Yesterday, I went to the meeting that we normally have with the person that is assigned to us, and I had a summary, and there were a couple of things that I learned that I was unaware of, or maybe I forgot. I know that my uncle, Sergeant Mott Taylor, he was in the Army, that he was on a mission to deliver supplies to the front lines, I guess. And the supplies were delivered, and on his way back, a new thing that I learned, that his group was attacked. There were 2 attacks. And one of the questions that I asked, because I think somewhere I heard that most of the soldiers that were in his unit in that delivery were African Americans. So I asked them, were there any survivors, or were there any people that they have record of that survived. And there was one, and she told me, but it was a very strange situation because they have records of that person being captured, being put in prison, and I guess it was in the North Korean prison, but they also have record of him being released and brought to, maybe it was the demilitarized zone or whatever, and repatriated to the side where he would be safe. But after that, nobody knows what happened to him. And I was kind of excited at first. I said, well, maybe I might be able to see if I could locate some of his family and see what kind of stories that they had to tell. And my question is there a possibility that I might be able to get some of the names of the people of the soldiers that were there on that last day with him? Because we do have some information on the last day, that last delivery too.
Do you want to answer that, Dawn? It sounds fairly case specific.
Yeah, so the short answer is that it's complicated. I'm not sure if the person you were sitting down with, I recognize the name, we might need to talk after through your SCO, that depending on what you received yesterday, you might have received your individual deceased personnel file. Sometimes that has the name of the other individuals who were there that day. You can also look at things like mourning reports. There is a challenge though, because for living people or people who survived, we have it drilled into us. PII, personal information, and then personal health information. So for us, and I don't want to, I'm a little bit out of my lane right now, but we're not usually the people who would give information about living service members. There are cases where family to family, your service casualty officer might ask you to check a box if you want to share information, and the SCOs help with that. But in terms of getting the information, there's a possibility we might have mourning reports, but in general, we don't give out the information of other living people because that might violate privacy regulations.
I think some months ago, I received that detailed file, and I went through that, and there was a lot of information that we did not know that was in that file, and I'm very appreciative of that. But I was just, after I finished the meeting, I was thinking about where, if I wanted to research, where would I start? And I know this year, had my uncle lived, he would have been 100 this year, and I know that makes it difficult also in order to research something like that.
Yeah, and I think this is something, your question's great, and we've had it a few times. The other thing is in terms of your personal research, if there's more questions you have about your case, please make sure you ask us, ask your service casualty officer. Those are things we can definitely help with. If there are things that you want to do, and this is the opinion of Don Berry, not authorized by the government of the United States of America, I would say in general, newspaper.com, ancestry.com, there's lots of online resources in terms of where you can research your case more. We also have a lot of family members who go to the National Archives, presidential museums, all kinds of stuff like that. In terms of where to start, speaking generally, not specific about cases, as a person who loves research, there's lots of places that you can look. The thing that we're limited by is giving out personal information of other people. If it's related to your case, there's things that we can do to help.
I know I worked several years at the depository at Norton Air Force Base for a while too. Is there some way that we can have access, or is there a procedure?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I missed the very beginning of your question.
I said for several years I worked as a researcher at Norton Air Force Base in the depository that had lots of documents and film of different segments of history at that time, that a lot of the information that they got in came to that depository. And is there a procedure that is in place? Say, for instance, if we wanted to research a place like that. I know most of the work that we did was for the Pentagon and other places. It wasn't too many civilians that were allowed to do that.
So if it's information about your case specifically that we have, in most cases we'll share it with you unless there's some sort of restriction on it. In terms of other places, even we were talking about this in the Cold War session, and I'm not sure if Heather Harris is still here, but even at the National Archives, we as DPAA researchers have to go ourselves as people, and all of those public institutions, AFRA for the Air Force and for the presidential libraries and for the National Archives, you as a person can absolutely go, and we follow pretty much the same procedures that other people would follow to do archival research.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope I didn't miss anything.
We good? I think we're good. All right.
Hi, I'm sorry if I missed this. You may have already answered this question, but you've described the past 2 days about how you've developed your own processes and procedures about how to go about identification in the DNA sequencing and all that, and how you work with other government agencies like the FBI, the CDC, and places like that. My question is, how often, how closely do you work with private industry medical labs? And do you have a liaison that stays with them to see if they've developed any new sciences? Because we all know science develops daily. And is that something that stayed on top of?
So that's an excellent question. So a little bit of background. I am an infectious disease immunologist by trade. I'm a classical virologist. So I cut my teeth at the New York State Department of Health, doing research in the medical field. So I still follow those journals every day. So to answer your question, in 2012, there was the first article that came out about personalized medicine, and that was in regards to being able to sequence your whole genome to determine if you had predispositions and different things like that. That's how we started to develop the method that we needed to do. The unfortunate part is with those advances that go on in the medical genetics, it's with really good DNA, high copy DNA, high quality. So we do look at those, but we do also work with industry. So the SNP, that test that I told you we developed, I put out what we call a request for proposal, and it basically had the following caveats. You had to develop the software, the analytical method, and the chemistry such that regardless of your relationship, we could use that. And so it was awarded to a company, and we worked with them, and we actually helped them develop the method. So we do that quite a bit. We follow the modern sciences. And to give you an example, most labs follow what we do in the criminal work. So we brought that next generation sequencing on in 2016. It wasn't until 2021 that your state and local crime labs brought it on. So that's an excellent question. We do search that all the time. I have scientists who go to different scientific meetings. We're always doing literature searches and to see what we can do. One of the advancements I talked about, going 20% increase in samples this year, was because we worked with a company that developed a medical genetics testing instrument, and we wanted to adapt it to forensics, and they saw how we were utilizing their chemistry in another way, and they sold us that instrument so we could do it. So it's a great question. We do keep our pulse on that all the time. And then we do hear stuff from our partnerships and innovations. If they hear something that may come our way, we will work with them as well. So great question.
All right. Anyone else? Am I missing anyone? No? All right, good. Oh, no, sorry. I spoke too soon. Go ahead.
Thanks for all your information, your time, and your dedication. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just have a quick question about DNA gathering. I have a series of letters, a packet of letters from my father to my mother, back in the days when you had to lick the envelope and lick the stamp. Are those of any value as far as DNA collection? And I mean, they're almost 80 years old.
Yeah, so actually they're really good to an extent if they're the last resort. So when it comes from letters that came from theaters of operation, sometimes the person who licked the envelope was not the actual person who wrote the letter because it had to go through and get sanitized sometimes. Personal letters when they're in, like when they were in basic training or something like that, and there, the brutal honest truth is we've tried letters, we've been trying to do them and optimize them, but they only work about 1% of the time. And a lot of it has to, a lot of people touch them at different times and things like that. We do them as a last resort. We will pull them in and we will put the sequence in if we get it, but there's no way to verify if it's actually the authentic or not type thing. So we do look for hairs or teeth or something like that, but sometimes they do work. We've had letters where the girlfriend or the wife of the service member cut it open at the top, so they never opened where it was licked, and that protected it, and that sometimes helps us with it. So we will always work with the family if we need a reference. We'll figure something out. Thank you.
Okay. We good? All right. I'm going to take this opportunity. Right over here, the gentleman with the big flower on his lapel is Mr. Gilhun Lee from the Ministry of Patriot and Veterans Affairs. He was the one that arranged the reception for you last night. Thank you so much. I'd just like, on behalf of the Outreach and Communication staff, I'd like to thank you so much. I hope you found this very enlightening and useful for your time and the money you spent here. It was our distinct honor to provide you information and to assist you. And with that, I'll call the director up to close us out. Thank you for attending. You want to release the panel? Oh, the panel can go. Thank you for answering questions, folks. Thank you. Sorry.
As you can imagine, this is not an easy event to put together. We at DPA cannot do this alone. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge that during COVID, when we connected with you virtually, we learned. And we also realized that as many of your peers age or have situations that come up, preventing them from coming to Washington, it was important for us to be able to live stream this event. And we do that. We started doing that 3 years ago, and we do it with great, great success. I'd like to recognize the Defense Media Activity. They're a defense agency that is located at Fort Meade, Maryland. I'd like to call Darcy Montoya and Kevin Miller, please, if they could come up. So our partners at DMA are the ones behind the scenes, but the ones that are able to, through technology and through their expertise, stream this event in its entirety to anyone interested in coming up and watching it. And we also archive it for the future for anyone that might want to view it. So this is Darcy Montoya and Kevin Miller from DMA, and on behalf of the families and my colleagues, thank you very much for all you do behind the scenes, by the way. Just a memento of this year's poster to you both. Thank you. Thanks very much. For DPAA, this is not a DPAA show. This is a Department of Defense show. And it's one that we depend greatly upon our partners. You obviously know the indomitable, and I use that word a lot because there are a lot of indomitable people in this enterprise. You know Dr. Tim McMahon, true partner of DPA and his dedicated staff. You know, they are the ones that do the DNA analysis. They are the ones that do push the science in inordinate ways. So Tim, thank you and your team for the tremendous partnership that we have with you. For you all, you know that your contact is not necessarily with DPA itself, but it's with your Service Casualty Office. We know that we cannot do this without the full partnership of the Service Casualty Offices. They do the genealogical research. When we ask them that we're looking at a particular case, when we ask them that we're looking at this particular set of list of individuals, they go find the family members to which to donate a DNA reference sample. They're the ones that communicate with you. They're the ones that sit in the case summary reviews with you. So again, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, we are indebted to the great partnership we have with them. And then within DPA alone, this is a big event. There are 434 of you. There are 172 of you that this was your first time, and I met many of you. And I applaud you for the fact that you are here, in some cases, overcoming reticence and reluctance on behalf of maybe your grandmother or mother who never wanted to come. I just met a couple from Washington State. This was their first time here. So again, as we bring you here, we obviously give you the general updates, but where the rubber meets the road is in that room where you, your case analyst, and your Service Casualty Office are able to connect. And they begin this work, by the way, months in advance. So for all of my Indo-Pacific Korean War researchers, historians, analysts, we owe hats off to them because, again, burning both ends of the candle, working till long hours of the day to get your case summary review ready. Many of them had at least 12, sometimes more, to give you the product that you deserve, and more importantly, a current update of what we know, and more importantly, where we might go next. So again, to my colleagues in the Indo-Pacific Directorate, hats off to them. Now, an event like this, as you can imagine, takes a whole lot of heavy lifting logistics-wise. Why aren't you moving? Where's the other one? Okay, he needs to come up. You need to come up. You are welcome. When we heard that there was a hearing impaired family member here, we knew it was our obligation with which to provide you that full communication. Oh, there she is. So it takes a lot of planning. It takes a lot of organizing. It takes a lot of execution with which to put this together in such a, I would say, seamless way. The two individuals behind me do it, I wouldn't say effortlessly, but to me it looks effortless because they do it so well, so professionally, in ways that you have what you have. So Greg Hayes over here is the behind-the-scenes man. He's the one that starts this process 6-9 months in advance. In fact, probably after you leave, he's probably working on the next Korean Cold War annual government briefings. Greg is a mover and a shaker when it comes to muscling the hotel, when it comes to basically telling the hotel what it is we expect on behalf of you. You won't hear him out front. In fact, some of you may have never seen his face. But more importantly, take it from me, he has your interests at heart. And all of this, all the logistical backroom dealing, wheeling and dealing is because of this man. How many?
I've been here since 2001.
2001. You know, I love sports metaphors, and so yesterday when I met with the team before you all arrived, I told them that the best point guard, now this is obviously a subjective opinion, the best point guard in the world I thought was Caitlin Clark. You know, the University of Iowa graduate, all-time scoring leader in the NCAA, now with the Indiana Fever. I was wrong. The best point guard in the world is a young lady behind me, on my right. Do not let her rank fool you. One would think that, by the way, this rank is fairly new. Lieutenant Vela was just promoted 6 months ago. Do not let the rank fool you. This is a young lady, this is an Air Force officer well beyond what you see on her shoulder boards. She was the one that we put to quarterback, to run the point on this entire event. I was impressed, among other things, and I've worked with Jennifer many, many times over many different things, but what particularly impressed me about her and this event, being your point guard, being your quarterback, was the inordinate attention to detail that she applied to this. She does it with great heart, she does it with great compassion, and more importantly, she does it with great diligence. Thank you. Thank you both. Please allow me to tell you. You heard me say yesterday, we're here to account for your loved one. And I hope you came away realizing that whether you're an analyst, a researcher, historian, whether you're a scientist in the laboratory, or anything in between, the photographer that supports the site, the logistician, the financial management comptroller, to any of these people, all 750 within DPAA, I hope you've come away realizing that we take seriously our mission to account for your loved one. But I hope you also came away recognizing that we also take seriously the second part. 1A is accounting, 1B is communicating. I hope you came away recognizing that we take seriously the need for us to communicate with you. But as you heard me say yesterday, that's not enough. We need to also connect with you. And so on behalf of my colleagues in DPAA, AFMIS, AFDIL, in the service casualty offices, thank you for connecting with us. Thank you for allowing us to connect with you. We've shared laughs, we've shared tears, we've shared frustrations, we've shared anger. And through all of this, please understand, all of us in DPA, all of us in DOD are staunchly, steadfastly committed to you. The flag that you are very familiar with, your flag, those words, those three words, you are not forgotten, are for the service member. But we in DOD recognize that those three words also apply to you. You are not forgotten. God bless you all. You know, may He may his graces be shed upon our shared mission. And it is a shared mission. We want this as much as you do. We want to provide you the answers that you rightfully deserve. So recognize that you are not forgotten. God bless you. Have a safe trip home, and we look forward to seeing you next year.